going first? Okay.
Okay. Okay, cool. So thank you everyone for joining us for our climate and justice teach-in. I will now turn it to Elinne Becket, a biology professor here at CSUSM, who will be moderating our climate solutions panel. She is an assistant professor in the biology department. Sorry, I already mentioned that. Thank you for joining us today and for moderating. So I will now turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Marissa. So as she mentioned, I am a professor in the biology department here at Cal State San Marcos. And my focus, I'm a microbiologist, specifically microbial genomicist. And basically what that means, I study the DNA of all the microbes that are in coastal ecosystems. And specifically what we try to focus on is how all the stuff that humans are dumping into the ocean, whether it be like all different kinds of waste or antibiotics or microplastics, et cetera, end up really like affecting the resilience and the composition of our coastal ecosystems, you know, with microbes being the base of the food web. And if you heard the previous hour talk, then you can see how like a little bit more on the climate science side of things. But for this hour, we will be focusing on climate solutions. So we will have three speakers, Professor Liz Ritter, Professor Sarah Abboud, and Professor William Byun, all professors from here at Cal State San Marcos. And so what we will do is we will give each panelist a chance to speak for 5 to 7 minutes. You may put your questions into the chat as they're speaking or after they're speaking. And then once all three panelists have spoken and introduced themselves for like 5 to 7 minutes each, then we will open it up to Q&A so that we could dive even deeper into their knowledge on climate and experience in climate solutions. So with that, I will transition into our first speaker, Professor Liz Ritter. So Liz, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and take it away.
Thank you, Elinne. So hello, as Elinne mentioned, I'm Liz Ritter, and I'm an associate professor of geography in the liberal studies department here at CSUSM. So I describe myself as a biogeographer and a physical geographer. And so I look at human environment relationships, mostly through changes in vegetation patterns and the physical landscape. So I am lucky in that I get to collaborate with lots of different geographers, paleobotanists, climate scientists, archaeologists, just a really neat group of people. We're currently working on a project looking at past climate changes and their effects on human societies in Cyprus, Lebanon, Jordan, and Sardinia. So what we do with that, just to give you a brief overview, we're trying to understand these past environments by looking at the processes that occur on the landscape today. So we want to know how past societies responded to and were affected by changes to climate and landscapes. And so I go out and I collect modern samples of plants, and so that we can compare them to the archaeological record. And we also collect modern water samples, again, so we can compare those to different things we find in the archaeological record to create patterns of landscape use and what that landscape looked like at the time. As Elinne mentioned, Sarah, William, and I are here to discuss potential solutions to the current human-caused climate crisis. There are many solutions, and no single solution will fix our climate, and no single one is right in all communities or environments. So we will need a suite of solutions from local to global in scale to drastically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. So many things went through my head, and I had to like zoom in on one just so we had time to talk about that. So there's lots to discuss here, but I want to start by discussing, surprisingly, population growth as the cause for climate change or other environmental degradation. Climate change is actually caused by increasing greenhouse gases when burning fossil fuels and from other human activities. The data show that these emissions are most closely connected to carbon-intensive production and consumption patterns, predominantly in carbon-intensive lifestyles of the relatively wealthy, like those in the United States and elsewhere. So by emphasizing population, this is making the assumption that everyone everywhere is equally contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. So we don't want to go there. So I'm going to share just briefly here. All right. It's sharing on my wrong screen. Of course it is. All right, how's that look, everybody? Wrong still?
Yeah, it's still the regular presentation, not the presentation style.
You might have to stop screen share and then switch this. Does that make sense?
Of course, like I'm the technology person and I can never make technology work when I want it to.
If
How I have my computers lined up too. We're going to do this instead. Yay.
No, it's still kind of frozen. Perhaps while we're figuring this out, if the other speakers, if they don't have animations, if they can convert their PowerPoints to PDFs, like that seems to be a little more seamless as well.
Oh wait,
There it is. There it is.
Yeah. Yay! Thank you.
All right, so sorry, I'm going to be off to the side now. So this misplaced kind of focus on population growth as a key driver basically conflates the rise of the emissions with an increase in people rather than the real source of those emissions, like I just discussed. So that's an increase in cars, power plants, airplanes, industries, buildings, and other parts of the fossil fuel dependent economy and lifestyle. And so by framing it as population being the problem, we're again saying that all people are equal contributors to the problem, both historically and presently. So data show that the 12 wealthiest % of the world's population actually contributes 50% of the annual global warming emissions. So if you see graphics like this, I just want to point out that that's not to say that there isn't a relationship between population and carbon dioxide, but just because there's a correlation does not mean the two things are directly linked. Okay, so graphs like this are very effective at making you think that. However, digging deeper into the data show that that's not exactly the case. So what else I'd like to point out is that this is really unjust. And you'll hear more about justice, environmental justice, and climate justice throughout the day. But basically, just to remind everybody then, not only is this putting the blame equally on everybody, the impacts of climate change are falling disproportionately to the populations that have contributed the least to the problems in the first place. And it takes the focus off of our urgently needed, effective, real climate solutions, which include switching to low carbon forms of energy, ramping up energy efficiency, enhancing the health of our forests and soils, and other ways that we can restore and store carbon. So one last word about this kind of framing of population. This correlation between the rise of heat trapping emissions and global populations has also been used to advance discriminatory, racist, and xenophobic arguments for population control and against immigration. So as we know, that is particularly harmful to Brown and Black people, marginalized communities, and people who live in poverty. And it also attacks reproductive rights and the rights of women. Okay. So efforts to reduce fertility rates and limit resource consumption have been very framed then as solutions, even though they're directed at people who have very low, even subsistence level consumption patterns. And again, not looking at those primary drivers. So focusing on the US, we need to clean up our power system, sharply reduce emissions from our transportation sector, increase efficiencies of the energy that we do use, so in buildings and the industrial sectors, and figure out how to cut heat trapping emissions from food and agricultural sectors, including food waste, and enhance the health and carbon storage of soils and forests. So for those of us who are living in those wealthier countries, we have an outsized carbon footprint, and there's arguments for and against the effectiveness of looking at carbon footprints, But basically, again, 12% of the global population, of which those in the United States are part of, are responsible for the highest number of emissions. The world is focused on helping the poorest countries and their populations emerge from poverty, as we should. And this includes the adoption of sustainable development goals, which means we want to end extreme poverty by 2030. Under our current models of economic growth, poverty reduction will bring an increase in emissions. So then the population change in the poorest countries will become increasingly important as their lifestyles also change and they may become more carbon intensive. So in the long term, population growth is certainly important to climate change. So climate action plans need to include investment in health, education, and empowerment of women and girls. And this will go a long way towards strengthening the ability of individuals and communities to adapt to a changing climate. It is also critical to consider the needs of other vulnerable groups of people, such as Indigenous peoples, people with disabilities, and other marginalized groups, so that we ensure any sort of warning systems that prevent losses or protection during climate-related disasters can reduce, don't reduce the livelihood and impacts to those people. Don't necessarily increase the impacts to those people, sorry. Young people are going to be leaders of climate change, so we need support in building youth-led adaptations to climate change, apps that facilitate early warning systems, programs to clear drainage systems to reduce flood impacts, agricultural practices such as mixed cropping. So we need to empower our youth as well through education. And across the world, this is my big takeaway, girls continue to face multiple barriers based on gender and its intersections with other factors such as age, ethnicity, poverty, and disability. However, the research shows that educating girls has multiple benefits for each intake of students go beyond the individual and any particular society. So everybody benefits from educating young women. Better educated women tend to be more informed about nutrition and healthcare, have fewer children, marry at a later age, and their children are usually healthier should they choose if and when to become mothers. They are more likely to participate in the formal labor market and earn higher incomes. World Bank recently estimated that the limited educational opportunities for girls and barriers to completing 12 years of education cost countries between 15 trillion and 30 trillion US dollars in lifetime productivity and earnings. So just by educating women, we can help lift households, communities, and countries out of poverty, as well as empower women to make those leadership choices and be in positions of power to help in the climate crisis. So we have to also get women education beyond getting people into school. So we need to ensure that women learn and feel safe while they're in school, have the opportunity to complete all levels of education, and acquire the necessary skills to compete in the labor market. And so this is the big way I see that we don't need to rely on new and upcoming technologies. We don't need to wait for something that's still in development. This is something that we all can have impacts on helping today, is in the education of marginalized people, particularly women, and helping them to become the next game changers in coming up with climate solutions. So thank you. I think Sarah Abboud is following me, and I appreciate everybody being here today.
Thank you so much, Professor Ritter, for that, bringing up so many amazing points on that. And I look forward to discussing them further after the other panelists have had their turn to introduce themselves and their work. And so with that, we will move on to Professor Sarah Abboud, and I will let her introduce herself and her work. Take it away, Sarah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Hello, I am, as everyone has said, I am Professor Abboud, and or Professor Sarah, as my students know me, and I teach here at CSU San Marcos in the biology department, and I also teach at MIT for their outreach with biotech programs. And I'm going to be watching the chat a little bit today because it's going to be a bit interactive. So let's play a game first. All right, let me make sure I can see everything. Okay, so what do you think is the percent of Americans that think global warming is happening? What do you think? 60, 46, 30, 25. All right, we have a wide range of numbers there. 15. All right. So as you can see here, it's actually 72%. So 72% of Americans, which kind of seems like it's a high number based on the estimates in the chat. Americans know that climate change is happening. So if you look at this schematic, we see that the minimum, I think, is 45%, but majority is above 50 or much, much higher. Yeah, exactly. I'm glad I was wrong too when I first looked into these numbers. All right, who's up for another one? What percent of Americans think global warming will harm them personally? All right, we got 50%, 40, 60, 32, 45, 72. All right, we're just, yeah, keep those big numbers. All right, and 33. Okay, yeah. So if we look at this little red block that I added there, for people who think that, for Americans that think that they'll be harmed by global warming specifically, it's that 40, sorry, my chat's in the way, it's at 43%. And there's an interesting kind of pattern that we see here. So as people start to think that there's kind of a greater distance between them and other things, we'll see this higher percentage. So, all right, instead of just thinking of yourself, thinking of your family, that's a 49%. If we think about, say, people in the US, 62%. If we think about people who from different socioeconomic classes, maybe lower, like poorer economic classes, it's 66%. If we think about just the animals and plants that live in the environments around us, it's a whopping 73%. So it's really interesting that we kind of displace ourselves from the issue, but we know that it can be a big issue. And the reason I bring this up is there's always, who polled this? So this was polled, I believe, by, oh gosh, I had the website open.
I mean, who are the people being polled was my question.
I'm not sure exactly. I'll look into that and get you more information. I'll look that up during the other talks. But great question. So when we think about climate change affecting us, as Liz mentioned, it's this very simply put, burning fossil fuels increases CO2, and that can increase temperatures along with many other things that can affect the environment, affect people, affect the plants and animals that are all around us. And so this is generally what we see. Nothing new here. Again, nothing new here, right? Carbon has been increasing since the 1880s. The Industrial Revolution, right around here, really kicked that up a notch. And when we think about more recently in the 20th century, you can see that it's definitely accelerated. Now, some of those health impacts that can actually come from global climate change happening is more heat, right? Heat stress. That also leads to cardiovascular failure, air pollution, more asthma, more waterborne diseases, more people getting diseases like cholera. You know, it makes me think of but back in the day, London, you know, not now, but that could be a thing. And it also increases mental health issues like anxiety, PTSD, and depression. So a lot of these different aspects can actually be improved with different types of clean energy solutions. And I know that Liz went through a bunch and presented a lot of amazing material. I'm going to be speaking mostly just about carbon sequestration and storage. But as we know from the introduction from Liz, is that we see that clean energy, well-designed cities, healthy, sustainable diets that include things like how food is either grown or harvested in agriculture can lead to less of these health impacts, which is great. Now there's a whole lot of other solutions too that were mentioned previously, and you can also see some more of them here. So if you go to dropdown.org, there's hundreds of solutions, more than just say recycling, that you'd see in your classic blog. So things like plant-rich diets, wind turbines, tropical forest restoration. So I wanted to talk first about soil carbon sequestration. Could it be the solution that we need? There's an initiative, it's called the 4 per 1,000 initiative, and it's to help decrease food insecurity and climate change. It pretty much asks countries that are with the Paris Agreement to draw down more carbon than they emit. So AKA capture that carbon, and rather than emit more carbon. And they store it in the soil. So as you can see with this schematic, burning the fossil fuels is still going to happen. Carbon dioxide is still probably going to increase, but then with soil carbon sequestration, then we'll see that there's going to be some knock-on effects that are really helpful for our environment, for our health, and everything else around us. We'll see lower temperatures, and we'll see more drought tolerant and nutrient dense crops. So this is typically with more regenerative agriculture. Now, before I jump into ocean and coastal sequestration, a lot of these types of agricultural changes have also been economically important and helpful. So I think when it comes to science solutions, you can't just think about what the individual science is and the impact and why, but it's also, is this going to be implemented? Can we look at the costs? Kind of like a cost benefit analysis. Now there's also another type of carbon sequestration, and this happens in coastal and ocean habitats. Typically, these types of habitats absorb 90% of the heat generated by recent climate changes, and also 20 to 30% of anthropogenic carbon dioxide that has been released since the 1980s. When we think of those fossil fuels being burned, carbon dioxide increasing, and then when we think about coastal and ocean sequestration of that carbon, what we see is typically in habitats like mangroves or wetlands, you see the most carbon being sequestered. So it gets captured in the soil below it. You can also see in the oceans, the carbon gets captured into the sediments at the bottom of the ocean. But this isn't quite as effective as those coastal habitats. And what this leads to, again, is are those temperatures being decreased and less CO2 being out there. So I kind of just left this here. These are the papers that I thought would be really helpful for maybe beginning readers. And if there's any other solutions that people want to be that would want to talk about, like algae and algae farming and algae biofuel, I also have some slides queued up for that. So we can talk about those things later. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Professor Abboud. And I'm looking forward to getting to discuss these with you further after in the Q&A session. So we will move on to our third panelist, which is Professor William Byun. And he will go ahead and introduce himself and his work towards climate solutions. Go ahead, William.
Hi. I don't have any slides, but I just wanted to kind of give a different perspective on things. My background is I'm a lecturer in finance in COBA. But I'm actually a practitioner and have been working in this the field of climate change for about the last 20 years, developing and financing projects for climate change mitigation in basically emerging markets, Asia. So for example, right now, one of the things I'm doing this term is I'm working with a group to acquire a 35,000 acre former palm plantation in West Borneo and converting that into a carbon sink. And I'm looking at it from a business perspective. In other words, the way that carbon markets have moved now, arguably, it makes more economic sense to just rewild and leave the land alone than it is to grow palm. It kind of makes sense, and I could talk about that separately. But what I really wanted to do was kind of talk about some of the, maybe a cautionary way to approach climate change. A couple of things we have to keep in mind is first that climate change is kind of a fellow traveler with sustainability and environmentalism, but they're distinct and separate. So there are areas where they may not necessarily align. So for example, if someone was looking purely from the perspective of carbon mitigation, it'll be great to go 100% nuclear. Or like in France's case, I think they're like 70% nuclear, but that's not exactly in line with other policy goals or environmental aspects. That's one thing. The second one is climate change really is tied in, especially in emerging markets, with the concept of economic development, and maybe you could just say fairness. In other words, why can't people in, let's say, Borneo have access to air conditioning or a shopping mall? It's not like we're the only ones who could go to a shopping mall if they want to. I mean, if they want to listen to Justin Bieber, that's their choice too. But we can't just regulate how they're going to live, especially since we don't necessarily do it ourselves too. Another thing to keep in mind is with respect to science. I'm always a little bit cautious about the role of science. I have that in one of my lightning talks. I don't know if you remember like the old commercial about Nike and Michael Jordan jumping around and then Spike Lee wondering, is it the shoes? In this case, should we do something, or should I just wait for that new miracle? Should I work out, or should I just wait for that new miracle technology? I just popped a pill and everything is fine. And in some, if we were to take a real nefarious look at it, you could say that companies that maybe don't want to get involved in any meaningful attention to climate change will instead promote scientific research and saying, see, we don't have to do anything because look, we've just invested in new science and they're going to solve everything. So yeah, let's let that problem solve itself. So just to be a little cautious about that. Having said all that, one of the things I find in terms of what affects my work is, it's a real simple question, and maybe that's because I teach finance, but basically, who pays for this stuff? It's nice if we find the science. It's nice if we find other social justifications for it, but at the end of the day, who pays? And if it's always the other guy, then especially in emerging markets, the other guy, that happens to be us. And how much are we willing to pay out of our own pocket? So having said that in mind, I would say that the important perspective I would think as a takeaway is the necessity not of only throwing money at it, because sometimes you hear in the news about, there's a pledge of like $1 billion here and $1 billion there. A lot of that is kind of illusory. That's one. And maybe the misdirection of science. But the important thing I think that comes into play is kind of like a deepening of the ecosystem of climate change. And what I mean by that is real practical things. Just the fact that we're having things like this teach-in is climate change put into agenda items of meetings, even like, for example, recently with the Boys and Girls Club of San Marcos. As long as it's more and more accepted and woven into the fabric of how we're as a society regulating ourselves or planning the future, it'll be important in deepening out that ecosystem. How about things like getting jobs? And I think it's important that we emphasize to our students too that there's more jobs in renewable energy than are in the oil and gas sector in the US already. So what's going to be a better future for them just economically in the climate change sector or in the declining oil and gas sector? So again, if you're only looking at it from a pocketbook level, where is their interest? And it's in climate change. And maybe this is kind of a really perverse way of looking at it. But like I said, I've been working in climate change for 20 years. And the moment that I felt that the sector was not going to die, of course, it has kind of ebbed and flowed, was once I went to the Carbon Expo in Cologne, and there's like 6,000 exhibitors. And at the time, almost all of them were lawyers and accountants. And anytime you have a field where there's so many lawyers and accountants, that thing will just never die. Just because they won't let it, it's in their best interest. It works itself in a different way nowadays. So for example, you see a lot of companies are scrambling to find CSOs, chief sustainability officers. right? In other words, you have like a CFO, you have a COO or CEO. Now many companies want to have a CFO. What does that mean? Does it mean that they're actually going to address sustainability? Maybe. But once a corporate role is created, those things never die. So in other words, that means that at least going forward, there's always going to be a voice, a seat at the table, someone whose own vested interest is to push sustainability goals. It's not a bad thing, right? Having said all of that, the final thing we could do is also look at what we could do on a practical level. And again, this is just my own view, but what can we do on an individual level to address climate change? Some of the things we do are going to be larger impact, some will be smaller impact, but just kind of going through the exercise of thinking about it, seeing what we could do, see what can be done, at least in terms of energy, whether you conserve, whether you're investing in new technologies, whether you're just doing anything. It's overall kind of like the idea to add little grains of sand and finally you make a mountain. That's kind of my perspective. I could talk a lot more about some of the different projects I've done. Like I said, I'm doing the thing on rewilding and forestation. I've done everything from geothermal to landfill gas, from collecting methane from decaying garbage to solar, wind, whatnot. That's really it for my talk.
So thank you so much, Professor Byun, for that and a totally different perspective. And I love how each of the different panelists like bring a completely different perspective to this conversation. So while people are like considering their questions, and also feel free, like once we open up to questions, to unmute yourself or put it in the chat, either way. I guess I'll kick off the conversation with, you hear constantly like the dichotomy of like, oh, make sure you don't use a straw, and like, and putting the onus on the individual, or you hear the other side, which is like, it's why even bother when like the main issues are on a much broader scale that way. And so I guess the question is, do you think that people in this room right now, from where we stand, can we make a difference right now, and what can we do, like so that we can leave this with hope, and a mission for what we can do next? So I guess I'll leave any of the speakers to when it comes to mind, instead of putting you on the spot.
So I can jump in quickly. It's very much William's analogy of grains of sand, right? Like individually, it may not feel like the things that we're choosing to do have very big impact, but again, collectively, that all adds up very, very quickly. And the things that we choose to do at the personal level also have other, I guess, benefits to us individually, right? Either whether that's lowering our energy bills, reducing the amount of water we use, less trash in our environment, healthier places for our kids to breathe and play, healthier work environments. Like those little things often have ripples, right? And so they don't just impact climate, they affect other ways that create healthier, I guess, living environments for us in totality.
Maybe this is something related to the economic approach, but again, recycling also would take off a lot more when there's costs ascribed to non-recycling. And what I mean by that is it's so easy, at least I find in the US, to just take garbage and toss it out into a black bin or blue bin or whatever bin. You don't really care. But when you go to Japan and you're living there and you realize, wow, you're going to get fined if it's not in this bin or that bin or whatever, and then you're also being charged for how much waste you're making, then just on a pure pocketbook approach, you tend to be a lot more conscious of even those little things because it's money out of your pocket. So the more we could do to include that, I think that'll help.
To kind of touch on some of those ideas too, I've been to Japan and I've seen all of the like 5 trash bins that they have, so you can separate all your trash out so they can get treated properly and most effectively. So thank you for bringing that up. I also just wanted to mention something like people can even go out and do restoration, right? You can go with companies or organizations here in California and help with restoration. You can go and instead of using the Google browser or Google Chrome, right, you can use Scotia and they'll plant trees for you. So if you are really concerned about some of these things, small changes can definitely ripple into big changes if there's more people that are doing it. And especially since we know that so many Americans know that climate change is happening. I think people are, when they get communicated to that it can not just affect, plants and animals out there, but also you independently, I think it gets a lot more impactful.
And thank you so much. Actually, that transitions perfectly into your talk, Sarah, about people's perception of global warming, global climate change, and how it'll impact them. And so there was a question in the chat, which was, why do, I guess we, or like people that are polled, why do we individually think that we'll be less harmed? And I know this will envelope into a broader conversation that Liz can chime in as well. But Sarah, if you don't mind addressing that first.
Yeah. So based on that poll, which I wasn't able to find it exactly, so I apologize, but I think the reason why people kind of have that separation from even their family, right? It's all about, do you see it? An analogy that I think of, it's like, oh, in college or high school, right? You had friends, and when you moved away, you started to not talk to them quite as much. It's kind of like that out of sight, out of mind. A lot of people don't necessarily see the impacts of climate change on their family or on their community or on themselves, right? They don't feel it. Here in California, we do, I think, a lot, which is what kind of goes to explain why we had such higher percentages of people who knew that climate change were a thing and that thought it would affect them. So I think it's and that if we think about California, we have a lot of forest fires. If we think about the Chesapeake Bay, the sea level rise is getting so much that whole communities are being gulfed up by the coast, right? And so that's something that you can actually see. You can actually jump in and know that it's happening and that it is affecting you and your community.
Would any of the other panelists like to chime in on perspectives of our harm versus others' harm in this?
Yeah, and I think I'm guilty of this too. In climate change, we always say, Dr. Smoke. And what I mean by that is, if you were to see, when people say things like, oh, climate change will destroy the earth and humanity, but then on a real gut individual level, it's like, for example, each pound that you're overweight is going to affect your A1C level and you're going to have a shortened lifespan. But nonetheless, I could say I engage in non-optimal behavior when it comes to my eating or my lifestyle, and we do this anyway. So how can we, and no matter how much I'm not sure if that's going to make a difference, but maybe again, if we're surrounded by good information and positive vibes in one direction, we may change our behavior just a little bit by little bit. So then instead of me thinking I'm just going to play Pokemon Go on my phone, maybe I'll go for a walk or do something else. And again, the little sands, hopefully.
Humans are really bad also at thinking long-term. We're really good at thinking up to about 20 years. And then we have a hard time extending beyond that, but it's really important that we do because we are living longer. So the major impacts of population is that we have doubled or tripled lifespans in the past 150 years. So, we've raised child mortality or, decreased child mortality rates, increased lifespans. So that's where the big population boom basically came from, that people are blaming. It's like, well, all these people, they're just living longer in most cases. So we have to have a longer view because now we are starting to need to take care of our sometimes great grandparents or grandparents and not just our parents. And so we have to have a longer view than like what's going to happen for those of you that decide to have children or you have nieces or nephews, like what's going to happen to them or what's going to happen to their offspring or my community in several generations, not just, I'm going to die statistically at 35 and whatever, I'm out. Like we have to take on a longer view to really deal with the scale of a problem.
Yeah, and inherently, I imagine that the people that were surveyed are also live in societies that have more privilege than others that are going to be more immediately impacted as well. So that definitely plays into that, which then transitions into another question that was posed. How do our perceptions compare to the rest of the world? And do any of you have insight into that?
I guess I work the most internationally because I spent half my time overseas, and basically people are the same everywhere. Everyone's everywhere you go, people are just a bunch of yahoos, and all they think about is going on a drunk bender and smashing beer cans on their head, when they're 20 years old. So that really doesn't change. So the same problems that we see here, it also takes place elsewhere, except we're much more self-aware, so we tend to blame ourselves more. Other people just think, huh? Okay, maybe it's a US problem.
Interesting.
I've seen, of course, the communities that realize that they're being affected right now are very, very much worried. We see a lot of Pacific Islanders. We see communities in Alaska. There will, of course, be many people in the Gulf Coast. But it is a part of their lives every day. Just many of us, again, have that separation, like, oh, there's wildfires in California, but I'm probably safe. So again, we have that like separation from realizing that people are experiencing this today and are having to make changes about where they live, the foods they eat, traditional life ways. It is happening, even if most of the people are yahoos, as William said.
Well, and that really does touch on, I saw this thing once where it went through what a family eats every day. And this touches on what William was mentioning, right? In the United States, the amount of consumption that we have, I think typically by June or July, we already use up what the earth can give us in the United States. Like we aren't eating sustainably. But then if we think about other cultures in other countries, a lot of those are having less consumption per family unit. And so with that, it leads to like their allotted, allotted amount goes longer into the year. In general, what it kind of seemed like is if we put it all together, we're in deficit. So we're using more resources than the ecosystem can actually resupply. And so I think this idea of the individual perceptions is definitely something that changes with culture, changes with country, but it also isn't just kind of what the individual person's doing, it's also what the government is doing. So if we think about New Zealand's political actions against climate change, definitely a very progressive country, right? If we think about some others, it may not even be something that happens at the government level. So I think that's one thing to always keep in mind.
When it comes to saying like in June, we reach like what is sustainable, is that necessarily a unit of quantity or what is being consumed?
Yeah, let me see if I can find it.
Well,
Yeah, so
sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
Yeah, I was just, so it's pretty much, it's how much resources per hectare are being used. So I don't know if everyone knows what a hectare is. It's a type of distance.
Liz, what were you gonna say?
Just to think about what we can do in the US on this concept of food and agriculture. Before food even gets to us, about 50% is waste. Between what dies in the field and then what doesn't get transported properly and then what doesn't even make it on the shelves at the grocery store, because carrots cannot be bumpy and potatoes have to have perfectly white skin and apples can't have bruises. And we tend to really overstock our grocery stores. Again, like William, traveling elsewhere has shown me that like stores run out of stuff all the time. It's just what's fresh and available that day. And if you didn't make it to the shop in time, too bad for you, you can't have apricots today. So we have a very different model of like agricultural production and consumption. And so even once we get that food home, we're really, really good at just throwing most of it away.
Well, one of the concerns I have, though, is in those countries, it's not that they like the system that they have, but they're aspirationally wanting to be just as wasteful like us. And then what do? Just tell them as a matter of policy, we could do it, but you can't do it. So that's kind of a hard one.
No, I want to be like them. I want to be like, oh, my apple's bruised. So what? The rest of it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
that reminds me, like we have this distillery here in Vista that has worked in collaboration with us where they take like expired baked goods from supermarkets and they distill that into vodka. And then they've also produced hand sanitizer and donated that throughout the throughout the city. And so like it's great because you have sustainability and happy hour at the same time. So it's like perfect win-win. So we have another question in the chat. Environmental issues take the lives of a lot of people and are the cause of so many diseases and illnesses. It seems that a lot of these issues could be significantly improved with a few government regulations. Why do you think this is not being prioritized in politics compared to other matters? And what can we do to take these issues to the government level?
I mean, in a participatory democracy, I guess the regulations we end up with is actually what we want, sad to say. So it almost seems like the only places where you could have effective and logical and good regulations is where you have some kind of like a strongman dictator. That's not something any of us want on a policy level either. So.
I don't know if that would necessarily be how I look at that, but I do think that here, I have a bit of a slide that touches on kind of how we can organize information. Sorry. Okay, so it's kind of like this, right? We think of the impacts that we're all having or that climate change is having on us, the solutions, the science, but then there's the voice and values and venue. And so, there are people out there who are advocating, every day with the values from the lessons that they've learned and the questions they've answered on climate. And it's kind of a key of finding the right voice that's personalized to the people that you're talking to. So, and then kind of finding a venue where everyone feels safe and that you're able to actually communicate everything. So, for example, I know even people have these types of conversations within their own family, and that's doing something good, right? If one person in an individual, say, family writes to their senator and says, these are the things that I would like you to support, and if they get end up getting everyone else in their family to share similar values with their voice, then they can shake that voice and not just keep it in their family or keep it in their community. It could get state level. And really, I think democracy is all about taking what the people want and applying it. We know that doesn't always happen, but that's the general idea. And I think that people can do a lot of good just from writing to people, supporting in groups like the Nature Conservancy, or there's the one where they're on a boat, Sea Green, Greenpeace, right? There's a lot of different groups that you can go out and advocate and get other people interested. And you can also do grassroots on your own. And all of that will eventually lead up to the government level.
What I'm afraid of is the opposite. What happens if there's people who are having anti-climate change conferences now and thinking that we're the uneducated people who need to be written to their senators and told how wrong we are? That kind of reminds me that the other speaker had the thing about where there's different districts where climate change is considered an issue. And it seemed like there were some dots that were entirely not colored at all. So maybe there's some places where they think we're the problem. And I hope they don't write to their senators.
Well, that's to Sarah's point, like it starts at the dinner table, right? And we definitely can change things from where we stand for sure. Liz, were you going to have a comment?
No, just what you were saying there, that yeah, starting that conversation at home. Usually when people say advocacy, they think, oh, I got to get political. No, not necessarily. Just by talking to your family members, your friends, continuing your education, that's advocacy as well. And then if you want to go political, do it. But not everybody has to be political. There's also other ways. Like I see Lucy on here, so I'm going to pick on her. Professor Solomon advocates through her artwork and through these sorts of things. So, it ties into other ways of communication. It doesn't have to be just talking at people. You can write works of fiction. You can do all kinds of
Mhm.
interesting things to advocate for change in your community or your household or at the country level.
I love that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Think we're out of questions, but then I can wrap this up in our last 3 minutes if
Oh, I have something really
sorry,
quick.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Sarah. Please go ahead.
No, I interrupted too. I apologize.
No. I was wrapping
so,
things up.
so you see how from what Liz was just talking about you talking at people isn't necessarily going to be the best way, right? It's more like finding common ground and talking about people's values and really talking to people, not at them, is going to be more helpful. And we've seen how anti-climate change views and climate change views have really been being put out there. But in general, what is kind of helpful to me is this figure here, right? Adults, US adults, change their views because of something they see on social media. So this typically is within younger males and younger females, but in general, it's still, I think, something really important that people can change their mind. And so if you see something on social media or you want to make a TikTok, like, do it. That can be part of your advocacy because that will eventually get to people.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we have to connect with each other based on our core values, and that's when we can really start having conversations and reach people that way. So thank you so much for bringing that up. Since we are at the end of our session, I would like to thank our 3 speakers for an awesome a slew of information as well as discussion. So thank you so much for your time, and to the audience for your attention during this hour.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Same. Glad you all could join us today.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Elinne. Let me. Okay. So yes, thank you all for joining us during this session. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate the panelists and the great discussions, and also the participants for their questions. So real quickly before we start into the next panel discussion, I wanted to share a couple things. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So again, just a couple upcoming events during Earth Month that are coming up. We do have a full schedule. I added a QR code so you can scan with your phone. That will take you to our sustainability calendar of events. As I mentioned before, please also check out our online resources. We have a lot of different things on our website. You could scan the QR code. That'll take you to some additional lightning talks that other professors have shared with us. There are links to different podcasts, art displays, projects, research. There's a lot of great information available up on our site. And for one of the events coming up, the Journey to Zero Waste Fair, April 14th, we will be giving out a lot of reusable items for those who come on by, like straws, utensils, produce bags. I think earlier Stacy had put information in the chat. If she can do that again, that would be great. But we are also having Cougar Thrifts. So any close donations that you all may have, if you guys want to donate to our event, which is coming up April 14th. So before then, if you want to drop off any clothing at our office here in Craven, 4700. I'm here during regular business hours, 8 to 5, Monday through Friday. But if that time doesn't work for you, or if you have any other questions, you can contact us at sustainability@csusm.edu. And let's see. If anyone, oh, thank you for putting that in the chat, Stacy. Okay, so I will stop sharing my screen.